The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Qobakhidze on Thursday said, "Our main message to our partners is that relations need to be reset and improved in all directions. This applies to the United States and the European Union." As the head of the government noted during Kelly Degnan's, former U.S. ambassador, and Carl Helsel's, former EU ambassador tenure in Georgia, several problems and difficulties arose, although everything is subject to reset and recovery. End of the quote. It is paramount that we take the necessary steps from the partners. We are waiting for such countermeasures and are ready for consultations on any matters. I'm confident that if the regional and global situation improves, so will our ties with the European Union and the United States. We have high hopes that the situation in Ukraine will be resolved shortly. Ukraine needs peace, and this will be one of the factors that will contribute to improving relations with the US and the EU, Irakli Qobakhidze added. Georgia's foreign policy priorities, the challenges facing the country, and plans for the future were discussed by Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Qobakhidze in the meeting with Georgia's ambassadors to Europe and the US in Berlin. According to the Prime Minister, an ambassadorial is an important format for meetings with ambassadors because it offers a good opportunity for detailed discussions on the country's pressing topics, foreign policy agenda priorities, ways to tackle existing challenges, and plans for the future. Besides Georgia's ambassadors to European countries, the participants of the ambassadorial included the country's permanent representatives to the EU and NATO and other international organizations, and Georgia's ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary to the United States of America. In May 2024, the producer price index for industrial products decreased by 0.2% compared to the previous month, while compared to May 2023, the index increase amounted to around 7%, according to the preliminary data from the National Statistics Office of Georgia. According to the document, the prices for products from mining and quarrying increased by 3.4% compared to April 2024, resulting in a 0.21 percentage point contribution to the overall monthly PPI change. In the same period, the prices for manufactured products increased by 0.1%, contributing to 0.11 percentage points to the monthly index change. Within the group, noteworthy price increases were registered for food products around 2% and for basic metals 1.4%. Along with this, the prices decreased for electricity, gas, steam, and air conditioning by around 5%, contributing to minus 0.58 percentage points to the monthly index change. This is The Checkpoints. I'm Elena Gvanjilashvili, author and the host of the show, and the Checkpoints team is ready to sum up Business and Economics Week for you. Integration into the European Union requires unanimity, and we all have already heard several member states publicly stating that they will oppose opening accession negotiations with Georgia, said EU Ambassador to Georgia Paweł Herczyński. According to the ambassador, the EU next week will decide about the consequences if the Georgian law on transparency of foreign influence is enacted. When it comes to EU-Georgia relations, with huge regret, I have to tell you that we are currently undergoing a difficult period in our relationship, the EU ambassador said. According to him, they have said repeatedly that enacting a law on foreign influence would adversely affect Georgia's EU aspirations. Unfortunately, this has happened, the EU ambassador said. Next week, the European Union will discuss the consequences. Discussions will happen first at the level of foreign ministers and several days later at the level of the leaders. According to the EU ambassador, the presidents and prime prime ministers will discuss and decide what measures will be taken in response to those events in Georgia. For sure, the prospects of Georgia moving forward have been adversely affected. Basically, the adoption of this law, as IC, Paweł Hrczyński said, had frozen Georgia's EU integration. As you know, integration into the European Union requires unanimity, and we all have already heard several member states publicly stating that they will oppose opening accession negotiations with Georgia in case this law is enacted. It has been enacted, and consequences will be decided next week, Paweł Hrczyński said. Let us continue with our short overview of what was new in Georgia's economy this week.
The National Bank of Georgia on Wednesday decided to keep the refinancing rate unchanged at 8% as inflation in the country remained below the target rate, with overall price increasing by 2% annually in May. The Monetary Policy Committee of the bank expressed concerns about heightened uncertainty stemming from domestic and external challenges and highlighted the impact of exchange rate volatility on imported inflation. It also noted recent fluctuations in the international oil and food prices, along with the surge in inflationary expectations in recent months. International oil prices have recently decreased, but the international food price index has been increasing for the last 2 months, it noted. Inflationary expectations have risen in recent months, while domestic economic activity is also stronger than expected, driven by increased credit activity, the bank added. Given the current analysis of domestic and external conditions, the MBG has decided to maintain the policy rate at 8%. The next meeting of Monetary Policy Committee will take place on July 31, 2024. In January-May 2024, the external merchandise trade of Georgia amounted to $8.4 million, which was 2.2% lower year-on-year, according to the preliminary data from the National Statistics Office of Georgia. As of the document, the exports equaled $2.2 million, while the imports stood at $6.2 million. The negative trade balance was $3.9 million in January-May 2024, and share in external trade turnover constituted 46.1%. In January-May 2024, the share of top 10 trading partners by exports in total exports of Georgia amounted to 79.7%. The top partners were Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and Russia. In January-May 2024, the share of top 10 trading partners by imports in total imports of Georgia amounted to 68.3%. The top partners were Turkey, Russia, and United States. In 5 months, wine of fresh grapes reclaimed the first place in list of top export items, equaling $140 million. The exports of ferro alloys totaled to $105 million, and their share in total exports amounted to 10.2%. The exports of precious metal ores and concentrates occupied third place, standing at $73.1 million, constituting 7.1% of total exports. Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakhidze announced at a government meeting that the country recorded 9% economic growth rate in the first 4 months of this year. As you know, we have seen significant economic growth with a 9% increase recorded in the first 4 months. This enables us to adjust the state budget, adding $360 million this year. The additional funds will be allocated to crucial areas such as healthcare, education, culture, defense, and regional development. It's important to maintain the current economic growth rate to accelerate the growth even more, which has a direct positive impact on the budget. These data are a good example of how economic growth benefits our financial planning and resource allocation, the Prime Minister stated. The Minister of Economy and Sustainable Development, Levan Davitashvili, addressed questions about the potential sanctions during a briefing at the government administration. He emphasized the importance of a dialogue with strategic partners. We have a complex dialogue with our partners encompassing significant cooperation in various areas. This makes us believe we can find common ground on different issues. Sanctions are unacceptable and damaging. They don't signify partnership. We believe we can resolve all matters through dialogue with our strategic partners and friends, Davitashvili said. The first Vice Prime Minister pointed out that some opposition figures and media seem to support the imposition of sanctions on specific Georgian citizens, which he finds regrettable. The EU comprises many countries, political groups and priorities makes the process complex. The recent European Parliament election highlight this complexity. However, I'm confident we will find a resolution through extensive dialogue. Georgia has proven to be a reliable partner of the European Union, especially in enforcing international sanctions, Davitashvili stated. The transparency law is a preventive mechanism so that the government can complement reforms and align with foreign policy priorities, stated the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia, Ilya Darcheshvili, on Tuesday. Ilya Darcheshvili was asked about the speedy adoption of transparency law in Canada. When we discussed this law, we always talk unequivocally about what led to its approval. Georgia has challenges in this direction. The law is a preventive measure to help the country navigate this through phase calmly, peacefully and consistently to reach the elections. The Georgian people should make their own decisions and the country should live in such a way that government can implement reforms and align with foreign policy priorities, which is our primary goal, stated Darcheshvili. The Georgian Parliamentary Legal Affairs Committee discussed and did not support President's motivated remarks on amendments to the election code. Based on the remarks, a consultative group of Central Election Commission, which is established within 10 days after the appointment of election date, should not be established. An amendment on the so-called deadlock mechanism should not be made, which says that if Central Election Commission fails to decide with the support of at least two-thirds of full composition, the issue will be put for a vote again. The decision will be considered as made if it's supported by the majority. The legal committee only took into account one point, which was the activity of a temporary technical assessment of election precincts, who should not affect the individual's social aid or registration in the program of the socially vulnerable persons. The committee supported draft bill's initial editions through a vote. Agriculture Minister Otar Shamugiyov on Thursday expressed optimism about this year's harvest during a visit to the village of Psuavi in the Western Emirati region. Accompanied by Sviat Chalamberidze, the state representative in the region, and David Tsitlidze, the director of Rural Development Agency of the country, the minister visited a processing enterprise operated by the Georgian Laurel Leaf Company. Shamugia highlighted the increasing demand for laurel, especially for export, which he said have reached a record $20 million within the first 5 months of the year, with a significant portion going to the Chinese market. Overall, we anticipate a good harvest this year across all major crops that we produce. I believe we are in for a successful year. Naturally, we stand by our farmers, he said. The ministry said Georgian laurel leaf had received a substantial grant of 570,000 lari from the co-financing program for processing and storage enterprises, which had contributed to the employment of 35 individuals. The company's seasonal production of approximately 200 tons of dry bay leaves is exported to China.
Transparency International Georgia published a report noting that TI Georgia has been observing the developments surrounding the Anaklia seaport since 2018. In 2020, the government of Georgia terminated the contract with a consortium of Western companies that was supposed to build the Anaklia port. On May 29 this year, it became known that the Ministry of Economy and Sustainable Development selected a Chinese Singaporean holding, which is known for corruption-related scandals and is under restriction restrictions imposed by the U.S. government as the investor in the Anaklia port. The Minister of Economy, Levan Davitashvili, has stated that the investment volume of the first phase of the project is $600 million USD. 51% of the Anaklia port will remain under the ownership of the government of Georgia, while a 49% stake will be owned by the Chinese Singaporean holding. The consortium selected for the port's construction includes the Chinese state company, China Communications Construction Company Limited, CCCC, and China Harbour Investment Pte Ltd, which is registered in Singapore but is a subsidiary of the same Chinese state company. In addition, subcontractors of the consortium are China Road and Bridge Corporation and Qingdao Port International. Since June 2021, the leading company of the Chinese consortium, China Communications Construction Company Limited, has been under restrictions on the part of the U.S. It has been included in the Consolidated Sanctions List, known as the list of the Office of Foreign Asset Control, OFAC, of the U.S. Department of the Treasury due to its being a part of the Chinese military-industrial complex. Companies included in this list are not barred from access to assets and from carrying out financial transactions, but they are subject to certain restrictions. In accordance with the U.S. Export Administration regulations, if American companies want to carry out transactions related to certain types of export, re-export, and transfers of technologies with companies included in this list, they are to obtain a permission from the government. This means that Georgia does not violate the regime of sanctions by cooperating with CCCC, although the Chinese company included in the non-SDN list is prohibited from purchasing U.S.-produced components without the U.S. government's permission. CCCC is one of the largest state-owned Chinese companies that is focused on the construction and operation of large infrastructure projects, including ports, airports, and so forth. CCCC and several of its subsidiaries were included in the U.S. OFAC list due to construction of artificial islands for the Chinese army in the South China Sea. According to the U.S. assessment, the construction of the islands violated the norms of international law. CCCC has been accused of facts of corruption on several occasions. In 2009, the World Bank prohibited the company from participating in its projects for 8 years due to revelation of facts of corruption in a tender announced by the government of the Philippines. The same year, a subsidiary company of CCCC paid a bribe of 19 million USD to the son of the country's president in Equatorial Guinea in return for his help in a tender. In 2014, a subsidiary of CCCC built a center for advanced technology education in Ecuador. Several years after construction, more than 80% of the campus facilities are unusable due to structural failures. In 2018, the government of Bangladesh prohibited the operations of a subsidiary of CCCC, China Harbour Engineering Company, for offering bribes to government officials. The same year, the government of Malaysia suspended a railroad project of the company. The reason here was also corruption. A subsidiary of CCCC, China Road and Bridge Corporation, which is also involved in the Anaklia Port project, has been operating in Georgia since 2018. Specifically, it has been building the Ubisa-Shorapani section of the East-West Highway. The construction works were financed by the European Investment Bank, EIB. Since November 2021, China Road and Bridge Corporation has been building the Tsunori Bypass Road, which is being implemented with the support of the Asian Development Bank, ADB. On September 10, 2020, the U.S. Embassy to Georgia released information regarding CCCC in which they point out that the activities of the Chinese company in developing countries are distinguished by shoddy construction, labor abuses, environmental damage, and unsustainable debt. The spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State made a similar statement on June the 1st this year. He additionally noted that it is important to make sure that Georgia's security and sovereignty, or the security of the country's Euro-Atlantic partners, are not threatened. Bringing a U.S.-sanctioned Chinese state company into the Anaklia Port project in parallel with the adoption of the Russian law is a continuation of the change of Georgia's external orientation, TI Georgia states. The construction of the country's international transport infrastructure has not only an economic significance, it has an important geopolitical dimension. It should also be taken into account that the selected Chinese company is distinguished by corruption-related scandals, which increases the risks of importing corruption to Georgia, the more so at a time when the Georgian authorities are engaged in repressions against non-governmental organizations, TI Georgia states. The non-governmental sector is an indispensable institution for controlling and preventing corruption's risk in the country, according to TI Georgia. The checkpoints sat down with Ted Jonas, member of the supervisory board of ADC, a nuclear development consortium. Would you say it could be anticipated that the Chinese would be investors in this project?
Yeah, well, there's a long distance between awarding a tender and the recipient, the company that wins the tender. There's a long distance between them winning the tender and implementing the project. Of course, I can mention ADC and the Anaklia port ourselves as an example of that. If you want to see a much even bigger example than that, you can look, for example, at the Ningskra HPP, which was granted to Korean Water, a Korean state company, years ago, and the government has repeatedly postponed their deadlines for fulfillment of conditions, and has even threatened to break the contract. And I think it's worth noting, for example, that the government tolerated far more delays and deadline extensions from Korean Water at Ningskra than they did from ADC at Anaklia. But the point is that that the fact that they've won doesn't necessarily mean that they will perform. I'd also like to make some comments about the companies that have won the tender, if this is an appropriate moment for me to do that.
Sure, of course.
Yeah,
TI Georgia has just issued a report where they have listed some of the cases, corruption cases from 2009 to 2018, where this company and their daughter companies were also involved in some sort of corruption deals.
Right, and they are under two sets of, that I'm aware of, they're under two separate sets of U.S. sanctions, one that was initiated or is carried out by the Commerce Department of the United States, which prohibits Chinese communications construction company from procuring parts from American suppliers. So that means that no American contractor or supplier can be involved in the Anaklia port project because they would be punished by the U.S. government. The U.S. supplier of goods or services would be. There is also a separate sanction under an executive order that was initially issued by Donald Trump and has been renewed and expanded by President Biden, which prohibits any U.S. person from financing or co-investing with China Communications Construction Company. So that means that no U.S. investor can be in the project. So by picking this company, they have absolutely walled it off from U.S. participation. It is also the practice of EU companies to follow EU sanctions and vice versa. So this is a point I've made, which is that nobody from the West can come into that project as long as CCCC is the main contractor. And I think this was exactly the promise that the Georgian government made to the Russians, was that there would be no Western participation in this project. Therefore, Russia had nothing to fear from an Anaklia port because it's going to be a Chinese project, and China and Russia are allies. But a second point that I haven't seen anybody else mention and that I noticed is that the tender terms, as they were released back in 2023, said that no state companies could participate in the tender. It said that no company with more than 30% state ownership could bid for the project. And Chinese Communications Construction Company is 70% owned by the Chinese government. 30% of its shares are traded. And China Harbors, the junior member of the consortium, is 100% state-owned. And Irakli Kobakhidze brags that these are state companies, Chinese state companies. Well, the tender terms prohibited giving the award to a state company. And the tender terms, if you go to the Ministry of Economy website and you see the documents on this tender, the tender was amended twice to extend deadlines. Again, the government extending deadlines because they didn't have enough interest in this tender. But they have never changed. There is no public information that the government changed this condition, that it not be state companies. So once again, the process is completely non-transparent, so it's ironic that this government is accusing the United States and accusing the EU countries and groups that have been its allies of non-transparency. But of course, non-transparency is the only way they do business. So how does it happen that the tender terms say that a bidder cannot be more than 30% state-owned, and here we have Kobakidze bragging that they have given the award to 2 Chinese state companies? How does that happen? Did they change the tender terms? There's no public information that they did. So they are violating their own tender terms as far as public information is concerned. If they were to react to this, they might say, oh, here's a piece of paper showing that we made a change and allowed state companies. And my answer to that is, well, why didn't you make it public? Isn't this an issue of public concern?
This transparency that you mentioned, do you think it will be crucial in proceeding with further steps with this Chinese company? And do you see awarding Anaklia Port project to the Chinese investors as part of a bigger puzzle, which could be connected with Russian law and offshore law, which we have discussed before?
Yes, absolutely. I believe that the geopolitical environment has changed since February 2022. And what has changed is that Novorossiysk port is essentially closed to, or the traffic that can go through Novorossiysk port on the Russian Black Sea coast has been greatly reduced. And Novorossiysk was really the major gateway to Central Asia for Black Sea trade, because Poti is not big enough or deep enough to take container ships, whereas the Russians had deepened Novorossiysk port, and Novorossiysk is able to take bigger containers. Well, now Novorossiysk, many shipping companies from around the world are not going to go to Novorossiysk because of the sanctions on Russia. And in addition, as you may know, the Ukrainians have successfully sunk at least 2 or 3 ships in Novorossiysk harbor. And so Novorossiysk is now basically off limits. So the Central Asian countries are not able to receive imports or get their exports out with the West. And so the Central Asian countries, and this has been in the news for the last 2 years, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, as well as Azerbaijan, a Caucasus country, our fellow Caucasus country, have been lobbying Georgia and visiting Georgia to try to get the Georgian government to start the Anaklia project so that this bottleneck in their trade can be opened up. Now, I suspect that those 3 countries, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan, have also been lobbying the Russians and saying, look, back off and let the Georgians do this project, okay? The Russians, from their point of view, have a greater interest in seeing Anaklia operate because, again, their own port, Novorossiysk, is under attack and is sanctioned. So Anaklia can become a bypass for Russia for imports and exports, as long as Georgia doesn't comply with the sanctions against Russia, which it generally, it has complied with some of them. It has not complied with others. But the direction that the Georgian government is going indicates that they're not going to be too worried about Western sanctions on Russia. So I believe that passing the Foreign Agents Law, the offshore law, the turn against the West, the violent rhetoric of the Georgian government against the West, the selection of these sanctioned Chinese companies, it's all an assurance to Russia that Anaklia can be built, and it will only be focused on Russia, Central Asia, maybe Iran as well. I mean, you can note that the prime minister, and I don't remember but the prime minister and another minister attended the funeral of the Iranian president and made a big show of Georgian relations with Iran. And Iran, if you ignore the sanctions, Iran is also within the trade zone for an Anaklia port. And is also, of course, an ally of Russia.
Yeah. Do you see at least like trade-offs in the economic light for Georgia? Do you think Georgia could like gain significantly economically from this deal, from betting that there is a bottleneck and that China also might be an interested investor, so to say, in building this port?
Yeah, you know what I would say is, you know, the ADC planned project with Western investment is like a Mercedes-Benz, and the Chinese version is like a Zhiguli, okay? That's the difference in the economic effect and the project. The ADC project had 4 international development banks as financiers: EBRD, Asian Development Bank, Asian Industrial Development Bank, and the U.S. Overseas Development Corporation, former OPIC. It had a $50 million loan guarantee from the European Union itself. It had Dutch, Bulgarian, American, Georgian investors. Port operator, Seattle, and construction company, French, Seattle, SSA Marine of Seattle to be the port operator, plus a plan for a 400 hectare special enterprise zone adjoining it. We own that property. ADC owns that property. The Georgian government doesn't own that property. So actually, the Anaklia Port project that the Georgian government is planning with the Chinese has no special enterprise zone connected to it, whereas ours did. The upshot of it is, so Western investment, Western financial institutions, you're talking about transparency, you're talking about rules on local content and local employment. You know, you're talking about the special enterprise zone and all the employment that produces. The Chinese investment, China has, and I can send you numerous articles about this company in particular, they have a long history of bringing their own workforce, not employing local people. So they bring not only the managers are foreigners, are Chinese, but as well as the workers are. You can see this on the road construction projects in Georgia, by the way, that they bring in their own workers. They employ very few Georgians. They will not have a special enterprise zone. They will be cut off by U.S. sanctions. So while there will be some economic benefit to Georgia of this port, if it's built by the Chinese, of course, that's true. There'll be some economic benefit to Georgia if it's built by the Chinese, but it will be only a tiny fraction of what that economic benefit could be if it was if the port was tendered and operated according to the rules that we won the tender on. So I'm not even saying, you know, that, oh, it's only ADC that would make a Western project at Anaklia. The previous tender and its terms, had the Georgian government been more willing to make the project more commercially attractive, they would have had big Western operators as bidders, and you know, for the Anaklia port before. So the whole previous framework of this project that the Georgian Dream did themselves, the whole previous framework of this project from 2014 to approximately 2018 was an entirely Western-oriented, transparent economic development project. And then Bidzina got his instructions from Russia. He got his jealousy of Mamuka Khazaradze or whatever his problem was, and he killed the Anaklia project. And now we have what will be a corrupt and extremely limited development under sanctioned Chinese companies. And also, again, by the way, they're violating their own tender terms by having state companies instead of private investors.
Mr. Jonas, you mentioned and you raised several points that I want to dig a little bit deeper. The first thing is about the commercial viability of the project. Do you think it is more commercially viable today?
It is more. So first of all, I want to emphasize that both ADC and the government did several feasibility studies before the war broke out, before the war escalated in Ukraine in February 2022, that showed that it's commercially viable. And by the way, the business case for Anaklia was not even based on China trade. It was based on Caucasus and Central Asia, as well as legal trade that could go in and out of Russia, which of course there is legal trade that can go in and out of Russia, and it still does. So the business case for Anaklia never depended on Chinese trade. if there was Chinese, but China is very far, and the connections from Central Asia into China are not necessary. Although you can see they're close on the map, the infrastructure connections are not that good. So there's not that much trade that goes in and out of China through the Western route. There's a lot of Central Asian trade and Caucasus trade, as well as Russian trade, that goes in and out of the Western route. So, so what was the question?
Yes. So would you
so
say
what I'm saying is that about the business case. Sorry, about the business case. So what happened? So anyway, even before the Ukraine war, the business case was solid. The government knew that, and we knew that. After the outbreak of the war in 2022, that's what I'm saying is the business case has only increased. I mean, where there has been really active lobbying from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Azerbaijan to get this port built. Of course, the alternative, and it's not a good alternative, is the expansion of Poti port. But they just want to see something happen that will increase Georgia's Black Sea trade capacity. And I should mention one other thing. The Georgian government has constantly criticized us, saying that we were stupid to do the Anaklia project because Poti port, an expansion of Poti port by AP Mahler Terminals always remained a possibility that would undermine the sustainability of the Anaklia port. If there was another deepwater port on Georgia's coast, Poti, which is not now deep water, but has to be expanded. And Poti requires almost as big of an investment, actually as big an investment as Anaklia to become a deep water port. And they always said that, oh, you guys were so foolish to take our offer of building Anaklia port because we could never promise that Poti port would remain limited and wouldn't be a competitor. Well, here the Georgian government, it shows what hypocrites they are. The Georgian government is now planning Anaklia port. What about Poti? Is AP Mahler Terminals going to expand Poti or not? If AP Mahler Terminals continues to threaten that it's going to expand Poti, you don't get commercial investors, and there's not enough of a market for Anaklia. So the government has not solved this problem of whether Poti is going to be a competitor to Anaklia or not. And AP Mahler Terminals is a private company that seeks to protect its own profit. They do not look out for Georgia's interests. AP Mahler Terminals, for years, every time anything happens on Anaklia, they threaten an expansion of Poti port, which they then do not carry out. But the reason that they threaten these expansions, or they promise these expansions of Poti port, is to derail and sideline anything happening on Anaklia. And the Georgian government has still not solved that problem. It requires an agreement with AP Mahler Terminals to divide the market, basically, between Poti and Anaklia. For example, that Poti would handle, they can do an expansion at Poti, but it will handle bulk freight, and Anaklia will focus on containers, for example. That's a way that the two of them can coexist. And honestly, when we had settlement discussions with the Georgian government, Natia Turneva said that that was exactly a rational plan. But unfortunately, the government ordered her to stop those settlement discussions with us in 2021.
There is this question, or I don't know, this phrase that I hear about the American investors in Anaklia. The Chinese might be even more effective building this because they have a certain interest, while the Americans didn't have that interest to build Anaklia port here in Georgia. Americans could have built the port if they wanted to. This is what I hear from time to time. What would be your response to that?
There's some truth in that, in the sense that the European interest in Anaklia port is far stronger than the American interest in Anaklia port. And so the European participation in ADC was much bigger, really, than the American participation. The American participation in Anaklia was Conti as an investor, which invested a few $1 million. I'm not sure I am at liberty to disclose the exact amount, but they invested a few $1 million, Conti, the American company. And by the way, Conti still has shares in Anaklia, although Conti said that it was going to withdraw from Anaklia. In 2019, after there was so much trouble with the government, Conti said this doesn't look like it's going to work, and they withdrew. they said they were withdrawing, but in fact, they've never sold their shares. They've never allowed us to buy their shares. So in fact, Conti is still, the American company is still a shareholder in ADC. There was also SSA Marine of Seattle was going to be the port operator, and SSA Marine committed to invest $18 million, as well as getting a share and as well as having a major port contract. And also you had the U.S. Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, which is now ODA, putting up 1/4, it would have been $100 million of the financing. So you did have substantial American presence in the consortium. However, the EBRD was the main European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, was the lead lender of the 4 lenders. The European Union wanted to see this project built, that when the bank said, well, we're a little bit worried about whether there's going to be enough traffic, we need a loan repayment guarantee, the European Union said, we will put up at least 50 million of that money ourselves, which was an extraordinary offer. And it required the Georgian government to match it, which the Georgian government refused to do. And that's a sign of the Georgian government's, another example where the Georgian government has thrown away an opportunity on purpose to avoid European integration. So the European interest in Anaklia Port is absolutely as strong as the Chinese interest. I mean, the European interest is simply the western end of the middle corridor, and the Chinese interest is the eastern end of the middle corridor. But Europe is equally interested in this project. America is more interested in it unquestionably for strategic reasons and political reasons. American trade is much further away from the Black Sea than European trade. And I think you know this, Elena, from watching business in Georgia for many years, that European investment, European economic and financial involvement in Georgia is substantially greater than American private sector involvement. Although the American government puts up as much aid and as much support for Georgia as the EU does.
So you mentioned the Special Enterprise Zone, which is owned by ADC. Do you think there can be any kind of deal between ADC and Georgian government?
Badri Japanidze and Mamuka Khazaradze have always worn 2 hats. Okay, one is that they're business people and they can look at an attractive deal. But the other is that they see a responsibility to Georgia's Western orientation, and they behaved that way ever since I've known them in the 1990s in their businesses. And so, you know, they own the Special Enterprise Zone. They could make a lot of money by selling it to the Chinese, perhaps. Or you take, if we win the arbitration case, and as you know, I think all the arbitration proceedings are finished and we're waiting for the decision. I can't say whether we're going to win or not. Okay, it's a very difficult case for both sides. So I can't. And the reason it has taken a long time is because it's a very difficult and complicated case, as the arbitrators have made clear. But if we were to win that case, we've always said that we don't really want cash from the Georgian government. We don't want to take money from Georgian taxpayers. What we want is a share in the project. If the project is now a Chinese state-controlled consortium that is set up to smuggle goods and services into and out of Russia and Iran, and you know it's a completely non-Western project, you know, I don't see Mamuka and Badri wanting to have a share in a project with sanctioned Chinese companies. And I can't speak for them, but I don't see them wanting to do that. And I don't see them wanting to sell the Free Enterprise Zone to that consortium, although they would stand to make a lot of money if they did.
Also, do you see this as kind of like an indication of the course that Georgia is not drawing away politically from the West, but it tries to find ways to substitute West in the economic relations as well?
The Georgian dream is turning the whole Georgian economy upside down. They are literally turning the entire Georgian economy upside down. All of the road infrastructure, the vast majority of the energy infrastructure of Georgia, social welfare programs, education programs have all come from the West. And, you know, I noticed at the hearing yesterday At the hearing in the US Congress yesterday, there were three excellent witnesses, but they're all sort of national security focused. So when the one of the members of Congress said, you know, what's going to be the effect of losing Western support, they mentioned military, which is very important because the West has absolutely financed the buildup of Georgia's military. And they mentioned sort of civil society, but hello, that's not the biggest stuff. The biggest stuff is roads and energy infrastructure, schools. Okay, the U.S. and the West have paid for the vast majority. The United States, the West, the international development banks based in the West have paid for the majority of Georgia's infrastructure development, including under Saakashvili. Okay, this needs to be recognized. The Saakashvili government gets credit for building Georgia. They built it on IFI money, Western money that came from the outside into Georgia. So the country's entire standard of living, such as it is, has been based on Western infrastructure investment and money. You won't see anything like that from the Chinese, and you certainly won't see it from the Russians. The Chinese do not support the general social welfare or infrastructure of the countries in which they invest. Nor do the Chinese don't do it because they don't want to, and the Russians don't do it because they don't have the money, even if they did want to. And you can, and I can send you links about the behavior of Chinese companies in Africa, in the Balkans, everywhere where they've been allowed to invest. You get non-transparency. You get employment of imported Chinese labor, not local people. They don't do anything for the surrounding society or its infrastructure, and they pay lots of bribes. So they're associated with corruption. So that's what you're going to get. So this course that the Georgian government is taking is an economic catastrophe for Georgia. Number one, because of the cutoff of Western assistance means that all of these ongoing infrastructure and other projects are going to be stopped. And then secondly, the Chinese and the Russians simply cannot and will not replace that spending.
You know, this phrase, follow the money. If we follow the money for an Aklia port project, where will Georgian government bring money to invest in an Aklia port project? What do you know specifically, if you know anything, about the debt trap that is associated with China and Chinese state companies?
That's a really good question, Elena, because this tender was set up, and we commented on it. I did a lot of news interviews on it more than a year ago. This tender was set up for the state to have 51% ownership and the investor to have 49%. So the Georgian government has a 51% ownership under this new tender structure, and these Chinese state companies have a 49% interest. A 51% state interest means that just for the first phase of the Anaklia project, which costs $600 million, that's the investment amount. And by the way, it's probably only increased because that 600 million number was assuming that the port would come online in 2020. So it's got to be more than that now. Let's say 700 million. That means as the 51% shareholder, let's use the 600 million number because that's where I've worked out the math. With if the investment is 600 million and the Georgian government has a 51% stake, they have to come up with $310 million of cash and real assets, the Georgian government, to put into this project. Where is that $310 million? It doesn't exist. It's not in the partnership fund, which is the only kind of commercial pot of money that the Georgian government has. And you wonder, are they thinking about using the pension fund? There goes the pension for the Georgian people.
Do you think land and railway and roads, like what is also incorporated into these tender companies, would that make up those $310 million?
No, the land is given without, the land is allocated without cost. That is the nature of the project. And it wouldn't add up to that amount of money anyway. The big demand that many investors have had on the Georgian government in the past, which the Georgian government refused to do, was to build the breakwater, which is a big piece of infrastructure and I think costs in the neighborhood of $200 or $250 million. And it's really genuinely a piece of state infrastructure. Okay, it's part of the harbor itself, which is under the Constitution of Georgia assigned to the harbors. The offshore waters are under the government's inalienable ownership. It cannot be privatized. So in the past, during the first tender, for example, Singapore Ports and some of the other companies that participated in the tender in 2015, 2016, they had a consistent demand that the Georgian government put up about $200 or $250 million to build the breakwater, which the Georgian government consistently refused to do. That's why Anaklia Development Consortium was, at the end of the day, the only company that was willing to take all of this on and take all of the risks to do that project. Where is the Georgian government going to come up with $310 million today? They don't have it. And exactly as you said, if they don't have it, what are they going to do? They might borrow it from their Chinese partner. They might borrow it from the Chinese companies and then end up in debt to them, unable to pay the debts, and end up losing ownership of the project entirely.
Mr. Jonas, thank you for your time so much. And my last question, would that also help raising doubts about Georgia avoiding international sanctions? Because we see that international sanctions are not, unfortunately, won't be going that fast away, looking at Russia-Ukraine war. So would you say that Chinese investments, offshore law, non-transparency into the project could add up to the doubts that were naturally rising about Georgia from time to time, although there is no evidence and no one has ever said that Georgia has circumvented this international sanctions because it is a neighbor of Russia and we have the joint border.
I think that Georgia ceasing to comply with Western sanctions against Russia is part of this project. I think they're part of the business plan of the new tender conditions and the Chinese investment. That literally part of the business plan of that is that they will not follow the sanctions against Russia.
The majority of the CCC company that the government awarded a contract to for the Anaklia project is owned by the Chinese Communist Party, and the Chinese Communist Party is the #1 financier of the Russian military today. U.S. Ambassador to Georgia Robin Dunnigan said in an exclusive interview given to Interpress News. According to her, there are also questions about the quality and standards of the company. On Anaklia, the majority of the CCC company that the government awarded a contract to is owned by the Chinese Communist Party, and the company is known to be affiliated with the Chinese military. The Chinese Communist Party is the #1 financier of the Russian military today. So one question is, why deepen an economic tie with the party that is financing your occupier? A U.S. ambassador said. According to her, because the Russian military is being financed by the Chinese Communist Party, that's one question. Then there's just a question about the quality and standards of the company in question. So CCCC does not have a good reputation globally, Robin Dunnigan said. In 2009, the World Bank barred the bank from providing financing to infrastructure projects done by this company. Recently, the company built a port in Sri Lanka. There's a lot of controversy around this port. I don't know if you've read about it, but ultimately the Chinese government was able to secure a 99-year lease on Sri Lankan soil, and the ships, military ships, vessels can come in and out, Robin Dunnigan stated. So there is a lot of controversy about Sri Lanka giving up some of its sovereignty in a key critical infrastructure. The United States Treasury has determined that this company is a company that is on a list of companies that have deep ties with the Communist Party's military. So there are a lot of concerns about Anaklia. Of course, it is a sovereign decision, but I'm just reiterating some of the concerns that are seen globally about this particular company, said the U.S. ambassador to Georgia. Time to summarize this week's business news and outlook for you. Natia Taktakishvili will take the floor.
Elza Cincaradze, sales manager of Georgia Palace Hotel and Spa, declares that the demand for their hotel has increased by 20% compared to the last year. As she notes, Kıbuleti is more loaded from midsummer until the first half of September. As for Kıbuleti, June is less busy and active compared to other months. More countries arrive from midsummer. June is loaded by another segment. Business individuals visit us in May and June. As for expectations, we have about 20% more bookings than last year. Mostly neighboring countries are active. There is also demand from European countries, Poland and Baltic countries. In addition, compared to last year, the dynamics of bookings in 2024 is better. Elza Cincaradze said, according to the sales manager of Georgia Palace Hotel and Spa, the hotel welcomes the summer season with updated infrastructure. According to her, the hotel spa and gym were completely rehabilitated and new cafe bars were set up in the hotel area. Georgia Palace Hotel and Spa is the first Georgian five-star resort located on the Black Sea shore of Georgia's famed summer resort in Kıbuleti. Orbit Group and Blog Group offer customers an apartment at Radisson Blu Hotel in Tbilisi for $150,000 USD and get an annual income of $35,000 USD under the management of world's leading hotel brand. The offer applies to 250 rooms. The living area of an apartment starts from 35 square meters. The company offers most flexible payment terms to those wishing to purchase a hotel room, including single payment, international installment and mortgage lending. In the case of mortgage lending, if the long-term payment is acceptable to the customer, he will only have to get a bank loan of $30,000 USD. After the hotel is put into operation, the owner will pay the mortgage loan from renting, and in addition, he will have an income of over $2,000 USD, Irakli Gorgelidze says. Radisson Blu Hotel is a part of Center Park Towers. The construction of Center Park Towers will be completed by the end of 2025 with high-class international brands. The mentioned project will put Tbilisi next to the world's leading cities, London, Paris, and Milan. Center Park Tower is being built on Kazbegi Avenue. It should be noted that the top floor of the towers will feature the most expensive penthouses in Eastern Europe. Ambassador Batumi Island is working on the largest investment project in the region, which entails the creation of 2 artificial peninsulas and 1 island featuring ultra-modern resorts geared towards wellness and recreation in the Batumi seaside area. Ambassador Batumi Island is a landmark development project designed to elevate Batumi's international reputation and establish it as a long-term tourist hub. Spanning 84 hectares, the 2 peninsulas and artificial islands will seamlessly integrate with this city, offering all the amenities needed for a thriving urban district. As decided by the Ambassador Group, nearly half of the territory will be dedicated to the recreational spaces. A forest park will be developed on 7 hectares of the island, featuring sport fields and walking paths accessible to everyone. This first artificial island in the region will provide endless opportunities for locals and visitors, enhancing quality of life with both passive and active recreational spaces and offering new experience and lasting impression. Residential apartments, apart hotels, luxurious villas, shopping centers, workspaces, education institutions, recreation zones, sport facilities, Georgia's first large modern yacht club, eco-friendly transport options, pedestrian and bicycle paths, air taxi stands, seaside coastline, artificial beaches. All of these will be gathered in one space. It's important to highlight the project's significant contribution to economic growth and development. The existence of the island will greatly reduce the demand for development in the historical area of the city, redistributing the population according to the island's development plan. The planned international standard infrastructure on the peninsula and island will attract both international and local visitors and business, bringing sustainable economic benefits to Ajara region. Additionally, at least 7,000 jobs will be created, improving the quality of life and economic status of the local population. Slovak-Georgian investment group Gino Holding will build Tbilisi Boulevard with an investment of 250 million euro in the vicinity of the aquapark Gino Paradise, as the president of Gino Holding, Nodar Gyurgadze, said during his visit to BMG-TV. The project will combine residential, commercial, office and hotel infrastructure in one space. Tbilisi Boulevard is a visiting card not only for Georgia but also for region. It will be a mini green city which will be set up on 30 hectares. We will not cut any trees at that area. On the contrary, 3,000 new trees of unique varieties will be planted. Buildings, school, a garden, a shopping mall will be built in a free space. We are building a separate parking lot for 850 cars. Tbilisi Boulevard is a unique project. It will be a resort in the city, said Nodar Gyurgadze. According to management of Gino Holding, 7.5 million euro has been already invested. It should be noted that a credit line of 100 million USD has been allocated for the project by Bank of Georgia. According to the investors' plan, the Tbilisi Boulevard project is expected to be completed in 6 years. The self-care products manufacturing company Elma is planning to expand its sales area this year. Mako Makharoblidze, the company's founder, told BMG about this. According to the founder of the brand, at this stage negotiations are underway with Gdani Mall and Batumi Mall. This year our plan is to expand the sales area. By the new year we would like to present the product at a new location and add a new branch. We have negotiations with Gdani Mall and Batumi Mall. Supposedly we will have a new branch in the form of a stand in territory of Gdani. It's likely that new products will not be added this year, as there is no need for it, although an increase in the production is not excluded, says the company's founder. Makharoblidze also notes that due to the expensive packaging material, the product had to increase the prices by over 10%. Company Elma is a small business that makes self-care products from organic products and has been operating on the market for 2 years. The company produces face, body and hair care products. The brand was created with an investment of 5,000 lari and it employs a total of 3 people. Currently, its products are available in pharmacies and online sales platform. The company produces individual products as well as gift sets and corporate orders. A 5-star hotel is planned to be opened in Pasanauri at the end of 2024. The international brand Holiday Inn will enter the management of the hotel. However, as Georgi Rostiashvili, the founder of the project investor company Aragvi Resort, told BMG, the hotel might not be opened within the stipulated time. The reason is the damaged road to the hotel. One of the prerequisites for the entry of international brands into the management is a well-equipped infrastructure. This is a 5-star hotel which will be under the management of the first high-class international brand in the region. We are opening one of the highest level hotels and we are neglected by the local government, says Georgi Rostiashvili. The company invested 25 million lari to build a 70-room hotel. The complex includes a restaurant, sky bar, gym, bowling, tennis courts and swimming pool. After the opening of the hotel, 70 jobs will be created and more than half of the employees will be local. Georgi Rostiashvili also points out that after the opening of the hotel, a new place of attraction will be created in Pasanauri, which will make Tusheti municipality even more attractive in terms of tourists, and for this the support of local government is important. Nicholas Benianidze, the founder of company Shiraki, declares that farmers producing milk and dairy products are facing the risk of bankruptcy. The reason is the falsified products, the number of which has increased on the market due to the cheap milk powder. The sector asks the government to tighten control and create unified base. Violations are increased every year. I think that customers should have more information because a large amount of milk powder enters the country, which is very cheap. Several countries have excess production, which increases the share of falsified products. Consumers should know that 80% of restaurants and bakeries use unlabeled products, Nicholas Benianidze said. In 5 months of the current year, 508 violations were detected, according to the National Food Agency. In total, during the reporting period, inspections were carried out with 6,700 business operators, and special measures were taken in connection with the detected violations.
And that's all for today. We will meet next Sunday, 11 a.m. sharp. But before that, of course, check us out on bm.g regularly for more news and outlook in business and economics in Georgia, in the region, and beyond.
The Checkpoints is presented by pharmaceutical company GM Pharma.